She laughed in my face and said, "You're just a teacher. Where would you even get the money to hire a lawyer?" What she didn't know was that, in less than 48 hours, her entire world would collapse. So how did a quiet history teacher end up outsmarting a greedy sister, exposing a family betrayal, and taking back everything she tried to steal? Let me tell you how it all began. My name is Meredith. I'm 32 years old, and I teach high school history. I don't drive luxury cars. I don't wear designer clothes. My life is simple, predictable, and usually peaceful. But that morning, standing outside a prestigious law firm in Plano, Texas, peace felt very far away. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, sealing off the cool, air-conditioned interior and pushing me back into the suffocating afternoon heat. I tightened my grip on the thick legal folder in my hands, trying to steady my breathing. Across the parking lot, my older sister Bridget leaned casually against her glossy black SUV, arms crossed, lips curled into a smug smile that made my stomach knot. She scanned me from head to toe, my plain beige cardigan, my worn flats, my tired eyes, and didn't bother hiding her disgust. "Well," she scoffed loudly, drawing out the word, "what's a humble little history teacher doing in a place like this?" She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Everyone knows you can't afford a lawyer like Vance. Be honest, Meredith. Did you come here to beg?" Her laughter echoed across the pavement. I said nothing. Instead, I held my folder tighter. Bridget had always been like this, confident, sharp-tongued, certain the world existed to serve her. She worked in real estate, drove expensive cars, and measured success by square footage and bank balances. To her, people were assets or obstacles. She flicked an imaginary speck of dust off her sleeve and continued. "I'm heading to Dad's villa right now," she announced. "I've already hired movers. The place is full of junk anyway, and I need to list it before the market shifts." Then she looked straight at me. "Don't interfere. Dad obviously wanted someone with a business mind handling his legacy." Legacy. That word burned. Our father wasn't even gone a full week. Bridget turned on her heel, heels clicking sharply against the concrete, and climbed into her SUV like a queen claiming her chariot. The engine roared to life, and within seconds she sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and arrogance behind her. She believed she had already won. She believed inheritance was automatic. She believed I was weak. I watched her disappear down the road, then quietly walked to my old sedan. She had no idea what was waiting for her, and she definitely had no idea what I had already done. On the drive away, memories pressed in from every direction. 3 months earlier, my world had been reduced to a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. My father lay in a narrow bed, thinner every day, his once strong hands trembling whenever he tried to lift a glass of water. Cancer doesn't just attack the body, it drains the soul. I took unpaid leave from my teaching job without hesitation. I spent my days feeding him broth by the spoonful and my nights sleeping in a stiff vinyl chair beside his bed, listening to the rhythmic beeping of monitors that marked time and heartbeats. Bridget never came. She called occasionally, always rushing, always distracted. "How long do they think it'll be?" she'd ask. Or, "Make sure they keep him comfortable. I have meetings." Meetings? While I held his hand through waves of pain, she closed property deals. While I wiped his forehead, she posted photos of luxury homes. My father noticed. Even through medication, fog, and exhaustion, he understood exactly who was there and who wasn't. One evening, he squeezed my fingers weakly and whispered, "Meredith, you don't have to do this. You look so tired." I smiled and told him I was fine. I wasn't, but I wasn't leaving him either. Then came the night. Everything changed. I went home for 2 hours to shower and change clothes after 3 straight days at the hospital. I asked my best friend Paula to sit with Dad while I was gone. 40 minutes later, Paula called me, her voice shaking. "She's here. Bridget's here with a man in a suit." My heart dropped into my stomach. I drove back like my life depended on it. When I burst into the room, I found Bridget standing over my father's bed while he was heavily sedated, trying to force a pen into his limp hand. Beside her stood a lawyer I had never seen before, holding paperwork. They were trying to make him sign a power of attorney. Paula had placed herself between them and the bed, shouting that security was on the way. I grabbed Bridget's arm and pulled her back. "What is wrong with you?" I screamed. "Get out!" My father opened his eyes then, and in that moment, the disappointment on his face cut deeper than any words ever could. The next morning, he called his own lawyer. He created an irrevocable living trust and transferred ownership of the house directly to me. Not because I was the youngest, but because I was the one who stayed. Back in the present, I pulled into a quiet parking lot and sat there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look powerful. I didn't look victorious. I looked exhausted, but I was ready. Bridget thought money was everything. She thought confidence could replace preparation. She thought being the eldest daughter gave her rights. She was about to learn a very expensive lesson, because while she was busy laughing at me in a parking lot, I had already secured the locks, filed the documents, installed the cameras, and prepared for the moment she would finally realize that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of her life. I didn't follow Bridget directly to the villa. Instead, I drove calmly to the small coffee shop across the street, ordered an iced tea, and chose a table by the window. I already knew exactly how this would unfold. 45 minutes after she humiliated me outside the law firm, her glossy black SUV screeched to a stop in front of the wrought iron gates of my father's home. Even from across the street, I could see the way she stepped out of the car, chin lifted, shoulders back, moving like someone who believed the world belonged to her. She started barking orders immediately. "Derek, grab the boxes." Her husband struggled to pull a heavy stack of flattened cardboard from the trunk, while my nephew Tyler barely glanced up from his phone. He shuffled along behind them, thumbs flying across the screen, completely uninterested in the family drama unfolding around him. Bridget jingled a heavy brass keyring in her hand as she marched up the front steps. She didn't hesitate for even a second. In her mind, this house was already sold. The money was already spent. She jammed the key into the lock. Nothing happened. She twisted harder. Still nothing. Her brows furrowed. She tried again, this time with force, rattling the handle as if aggression alone could bend reality to her will. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. From my seat across the street, I watched confusion creep across her face, then irritation, then rage. "What the hell is wrong with this door?" she shouted, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "Why won't it open?" She yanked the handle again, harder this time, her expensive blouse stretching across her shoulders as she leaned her weight into it. "That brat changed the locks," she screamed. "She actually dared to change the locks on my house." Derek dropped the boxes and hurried up the steps, trying to calm her down before the neighbors started filming. Bridget slapped his hand away and kicked the door in frustration. I finally stood up. I crossed the street slowly, deliberately, the warm pavement solid beneath my feet. Every step felt grounded, controlled, steady, the exact opposite of the chaos unraveling on the porch. Bridget froze when she saw me approaching. Her eyes narrowed, clearly expecting me to be crying or begging or defeated. Instead, I stopped at the bottom of the steps and spoke calmly. "No one is allowed inside this property without my permission." She stared at me for a moment. Then she burst out laughing. A sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the quiet houses around us. "You've got to be kidding me," she said. "Open the door right now, Meredith. I need to inventory the furniture before the movers start." She stepped down and jabbed a manicured finger into my shoulder. "I already have buyers lined up. Stop being dramatic." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her and said, "You want inside that badly? Fine, I'll open it for you." But then I added quietly, "Just don't say I didn't warn you." I pulled out my phone. Bridget stepped back with a smug smile, motioning for Derek and Tyler to watch closely, as if she were about to put on a performance. With one tap, the biometric lock disengaged. The heavy wooden door opened with a soft mechanical sound. She pushed it wide, dramatic as always, eager to display her victory. And then she stopped. Her smile collapsed instantly. The living room was completely empty. No grand piano. No velvet sofas. No Persian rugs. No chandeliers catching the afternoon light. Just bare, hardwood floors stretching across a hollow space that swallowed sound. The dining set our mother loved was gone. Every single piece of furniture had vanished. The only thing left in the entire house was a single sheet of white paper taped above the fireplace. Bridget staggered forward, heels clicking loudly against the floor. She turned in slow circles, eyes wide, breathing shallow. She opened closets. She peeked around corners. She rushed from room to room, desperately hoping reality might change if she searched hard enough. But there was nothing. The emptiness hit her like a physical blow. She leaned against the doorframe, gasping for air. I watched her carefully. This wasn't revenge. This was truth. About 15 minutes later, police sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood. I had called them the moment I saw Bridget's SUV turn onto the street. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car, their presence drawing curious neighbors out onto manicured lawns. Bridget instantly shifted tactics. She rushed toward them, tears appearing on command. "She stole everything," she cried, pointing at me. "That's my father's house. She robbed it." The older officer raised his hand. "Ma'am, let's slow down." He turned to me. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I simply reached into my tote bag and handed him the thick pink folder. "These are the ownership documents," I said calmly. "My father placed the property into an irrevocable living trust 3 months before he passed. I am the sole trustee and beneficiary." The officer flipped through the notarized pages carefully. Bridget watched in horror as he read every line. Minutes passed. Her confidence drained away. Finally, he closed the folder and handed it back to me with a nod. Then he turned to her. "Ma'am, this paperwork is valid. You have no legal claim to this property. You and your family have 5 minutes to leave or you will be cited for trespassing." Bridget's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She tried to argue about tradition, about fairness, about being the eldest daughter. The officer rested his hand on his belt. 5 minutes. That was when the movers approached. Their foreman, clearly annoyed, demanded payment for wasted time and fuel. Bridget scrambled through her purse, realizing too late she had no cash. She turned to Derek in panic. He handed over crumpled bills with shaking hands while neighbors whispered behind their hedges. Bridget grabbed the money and threw it at the foreman before storming back to her SUV. I stood on the porch, silent, watching, not victorious, just steady. She had come expecting to claim a fortune. Instead, she left humiliated, exposed, and furious. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because desperate people don't walk powerful paths. They make reckless choices. And my sister was about to prove that. When people later asked me why the house had been empty, why I had stripped it down to bare floors and echoing walls, they assumed it was some elaborate act of revenge. They imagined I had planned it purely to humiliate Bridget, to watch her face collapse the way it did that afternoon. The truth was much quieter than that. The truth began in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and fading hope. 3 months before the argument on the porch, my life had narrowed to a single hallway in the oncology wing. The walls were a pale, exhausted white. The lights never dimmed completely. Machines hummed and beeped in steady rhythms that marked time more reliably than any clock. My father lay in a narrow bed by the window, his once broad shoulders reduced to fragile angles beneath thin blankets. I took unpaid leave from my teaching job without hesitation. My students wrote me cards. My principal told me to take all the time you need. I packed a small duffel bag and moved into that hospital room as if it were my new address. I learned the names of every nurse on rotation. I memorized medication schedules. I counted his breaths when the pain got bad. Cancer is cruel in ways people don't talk about. It doesn't just weaken the body. It strips dignity piece by piece. I fed him spoonfuls of broth when his hands trembled too much to hold a spoon. I read to him when he was too tired to keep his eyes open but didn't want to feel alone. At night, I slept in a vinyl chair that left lines across my cheek, waking every time a machine beeped slightly out of rhythm. Bridget visited once during those first weeks. She stood near the foot of the bed in high heels, her phone buzzing in her hand. She kissed the air near his forehead instead of actually touching him. "You look okay, Dad," she said brightly. as if he were recovering from a mild cold. The doctors seem optimistic. He wasn't optimistic. Neither were they. After 10 minutes, she checked her watch. "I have a closing in an hour. Keep me posted," she told me on her way out. Keep me posted. As if I were the hospital receptionist. After that, her involvement came through phone calls to the nurses' station. She asked about timelines, about prognosis, about how long we were looking at. She never asked if he was scared. She never asked if he was lonely. My father noticed everything. Even through the haze of morphine, his mind stayed sharp. He would squeeze my hand and whisper apologies for being a burden, and I would lean closer and tell him he wasn't, not even close. One evening, after a particularly brutal round of treatments, he looked at me for a long time. His eyes were glassy, but focused. "Meredith," he murmured, his voice thin. "You've lost weight." I tried to laugh it off. "You always said I should," I teased gently, but he didn't smile. "You shouldn't have to give up your life for me." I rested my forehead against his hand. "It's not giving up my life," I said. "It's being where I'm supposed to be." The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday night. I hadn't left the hospital in almost 3 days. My clothes clung to me. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot. I felt like I was dissolving into the sterile air. I finally agreed to go home for 2 hours to shower and change. I asked my best friend Paula to sit with Dad while I was gone. I was halfway through washing my hair when my phone rang. Paula's voice was sharp with panic. "Meredith, you need to come back. Now." My heart slammed against my ribs. What happened? "She's here, Bridget, and she brought a lawyer." I don't remember drying my hair. I don't remember the drive back. I only remember the way my hands shook as I pushed open the hospital room door. Bridget was standing beside the bed, holding a pen. A man in a cheap gray suit stood next to her with a stack of papers. My father's eyes were half closed, his body heavy with medication. "Just sign right here, Dad," Bridget was saying sweetly. "It's just paperwork so I can help manage things." Help manage things. The document was a power of attorney. Paula stood near the other side of the bed, her body positioned protectively, her face flushed with anger. "He's not in any condition to sign anything," she snapped. I crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed Bridget's wrist before the pen touched the paper. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She jerked her arm free. "I'm protecting our family's assets. Someone has to be responsible." "By ambushing him while he's sedated?" I shot back. The lawyer cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. My father stirred. His gaze shifted slowly from me to Bridget. For a moment, the fog seemed to lift. Confusion gave way to understanding. And then, something worse. Disappointment. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse her. He just looked at her as if he finally saw her clearly. "Leave," he whispered. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Bridget's face hardened. She gathered the papers, shot me a venomous glare, and walked out with the lawyer trailing behind her. The next morning, my father asked me to call his longtime attorney, Mr. Vance, not the man Bridget had brought. His own lawyer. 2 days later, Mr. Vance sat beside the hospital bed while my father, fully alert and fully informed, signed documents transferring the house into an irrevocable living trust. I was named sole trustee and beneficiary, not because I asked, not because I expected it, but because he said quietly, "I need to know it won't be sold the second I'm gone." He knew Bridget. He knew her appetite for quick profit. He knew the house, our childhood home, would become just another listing with professional photos and a price tag. What most people didn't see, though, was the financial reality. Insurance didn't cover everything. The specialized hospice care my father needed to spend his final weeks at home came at a cost. Private nurses, equipment, pain management treatments that weren't fully approved. We faced a choice: move him into a crowded state facility or find the money to bring him home. I walked through the villa alone one evening, touching the back of every chair, every polished table, every chandelier that had once glowed during family holidays. Then I started making calls. The mahogany dining set went first, then the grand piano, then the Persian rugs, the velvet sofas, the crystal light fixtures. Each item carried a memory. Each sale paid a bill. By the time my father was moved into his own bedroom with a hospital bed overlooking the garden he loved, the house was half empty. But he was home. He passed away peacefully 3 weeks later, with my hand in his. So when Bridget stood in that hollow living room and demanded to know where the fortune had gone, I could have screamed at her. I could have thrown every receipt in her face. Instead, I simply told her the truth. "You want to know where the money came from?" I said quietly that afternoon on the porch. "It came from those tables and chairs, from the chandelier, from the piano, because you didn't contribute a single cent. The empty house wasn't a trap. It wasn't a trick. It was the physical evidence of love. And if Bridget had been there, if she had sat in that vinyl hospital chair even once, she would have known that. But she hadn't. And that absence would cost her far more than any piece of furniture ever could." The sun was already sinking when Bridget finally drove away from the villa that afternoon, her tires squealing slightly as she turned the corner like someone fleeing a crime scene instead of a family home. I stayed on the porch long after the movers had packed up and the neighbors drifted back inside. The house behind me was quiet, hollow, and peaceful in a way that felt unfamiliar. But deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. People don't simply accept defeat when they're drowning in debt and pride. They don't walk away from what they believe is theirs. They start looking for shortcuts, for loopholes, for someone to blame, and my sister had always been very good at blaming everyone but herself. I learned the details later, through police reports and a few uncomfortable conversations with my lawyer. But even without those documents, it wasn't hard to imagine what happened inside that glossy black SUV once Bridget, Derek, and Tyler were alone. The air inside the car must have felt heavy, thick with anger and humiliation. Bridget finally broke the silence. Her voice, no longer sharp and confident, trembled as she confessed that she had already accepted a $50,000 cash deposit from a real estate investor that morning. Not a reputable buyer. Not someone who waited patiently for paperwork. One of those off-market speculators who dealt in rushed sales and quiet transactions. She had promised him the keys and signed deed by noon the next day, because she truly believed I would fold. Derek went pale. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The color drained from his face as he realized what she had done. "Are you insane?" he shouted. "You took money for a house you don't own?" Bridget started crying, insisting she had been sure it would work out, that she was only trying to protect their future, that everything had gone wrong because I had embarrassed her in front of the police. That's when Derek admitted his own secret. For 6 months, he had been pouring their savings into high-risk cryptocurrency schemes. He chased online promises of fast returns and ignored every warning sign. When the market crashed, their accounts were wiped out overnight. He hadn't told Bridget. Instead, he borrowed money from people who didn't believe in repayment plans, men who sent messages filled with threats instead of reminders. "I owe them by tomorrow morning," he said quietly. "They don't wait." The silence that followed must have been unbearable. In the back seat, Tyler finally looked up from his phone. But he wasn't worried about his parents' debt. He was angry about something else entirely. He kicked the back of Derek's seat and shouted that he had already told his friends the vintage pickup truck in my garage was his. He had been bragging about driving it to campus next semester. He didn't care about investors or loans or legal documents. He wanted the truck, and he wanted it now. The three of them sat there, feeding off each other's panic, until reality twisted into something easier to accept. They convinced themselves that the legal documents I showed the police had to be fake, that I wasn't smart enough to orchestrate something so airtight, that the real will had to be hidden somewhere in the house, maybe inside the wall, safe in my father's study. Desperation became certainty. Certainty became a plan. By the time darkness fully swallowed the neighborhood, they had convinced themselves they were the victims of an elaborate betrayal. They decided to return to the villa at 2 a.m. The idea was reckless, dangerous, and completely illegal. But logic disappears when fear takes over. Derek and Tyler would cut through the back fence to avoid the front cameras. They would smash a window, slip inside, and search the study for documents that didn't exist. While they were there, Tyler would grab the truck keys. They told themselves it would look like a random burglary. They told themselves it was their only option. What they didn't know was that I was already wide awake. Earlier that evening, Mr. Vance had called me with a quiet warning. His investigator had uncovered the extent of Bridget and Derek's financial problems. People in that situation don't think clearly, he said. Be alert tonight. I sat alone in the master bedroom with my iPad glowing softly in the dark. The live feed from the infrared security cameras surrounded the property in crisp black and white. Sleep felt impossible. Around 2 in the morning, I saw movement near the back fence. 2 figures emerged from the shadows. I recognized Derek's slouched posture immediately. Tyler walked beside him with the careless confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. They cut through the chain-link fence with bolt cutters, the metallic snap echoing faintly even through the closed windows. I felt my heart begin to pound. They crept across the lawn toward the dining room window, carrying a crowbar and a hammer. Tyler raised the hammer first. The glass shattered violently, slicing through the silence of the sleeping neighborhood. He climbed inside, brushing shards away with gloved hands. Derek followed seconds later, hesitating briefly before stepping over the sill. I waited until both of them were fully inside. Then I pressed the silent panic button on my phone. The signal went directly to the police. No sirens, no warnings, just a digital alert. Next, I activated floodlight mode. 4 high-intensity LED lights exploded to life in the backyard, turning darkness into blinding daylight. They froze. I triggered the interior alarm. A deafening siren filled the house as an automated voice announced that authorities had been notified. Derek stumbled backward, colliding with Tyler. They fell onto the hardwood floor, scrambling in panic as glass bit into their knees and palms. Less than 5 minutes later, police vehicles blocked the cul-de-sac. Red and blue lights painted the walls. Officers stormed the house with weapons drawn. Derek was tackled before he could drop the crowbar. Tyler screamed as his arms were twisted behind his back and cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Outside, Bridget tried to flee. A patrol car cut her off. She was pulled from the driver's seat, sobbing and insisting it was all a misunderstanding. I stepped onto the porch in my robe just as Mr. Vance arrived. He calmly explained the charges: breaking and entering, conspiracy, possession of burglary tools. And that was only the beginning. Bridget looked at me then with eyes full of terror, realized for the first time that this situation was far beyond anything she could manipulate. She thought the house was the prize, but she had just gambled her family's future and lost. I thought seeing Derek and Tyler in handcuffs would be the moment everything finally felt real, but it wasn't. The real breaking point came a few minutes later, when Bridget stopped screaming long enough to look directly at me. She stood beside the police cruiser, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her arms restrained behind her back. For the first time in her life, there was no audience she could charm, no deal she could negotiate, no shortcut she could take, just consequences. Lawyer Vance stepped closer to me, his expression calm but sharp. He handed me a thin manila envelope. "Now is the time," he said quietly. I opened it with hands steadier than I expected. Inside were high-resolution stills pulled from bank security footage, clear images of Bridget standing at a teller counter, signing withdrawal documents. The timestamp was unmistakable, 2 weeks earlier. While my father had been unconscious in his hospital bed, I walked toward Bridget slowly. She flinched when she saw me approach. I held up the photos so she could see them in the flashing red and blue light. "You forged Dad's signature," I said softly. "You withdrew $200,000 from his savings account while he was sedated." Her face drained of color, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The officer closest to her glanced at the images, then back at her. Bridget's knees buckled slightly. She had assumed tonight was about trespassing. She had no idea federal bank fraud was waiting right behind it. I leaned in close enough that only she could hear me. "You have 2 choices," I said. "1, your whole family goes to jail. Derek for burglary, Tyler for breaking and entering, you for conspiracy and fraud." Her eyes darted toward the patrol car where Tyler sat crying quietly in the back seat, his bravado completely gone. "Or," I continued, "you sign this agreement, you repay every dollar you stole. You drop all claims to the house, and you disappear from my life. Vance stepped forward with a clipboard. The night felt unbearably quiet in that moment, despite the sirens and radios crackling around us. Bridget looked from Derek, slumped against another cruiser, to her son, then back to me. She had built her entire identity on control, and now she had none. Her voice broke. "Please," she whispered. "He's just a kid." I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt tired. "You made this happen," I said. "Not me." Her shoulders collapsed inward. With shaking hands, she signed. The pen slipped once, leaving a jagged line across the paper, before she managed to steady herself and finish writing her name. That signature cost her everything. The officers discussed next steps quietly. Because she had agreed to restitution and cooperation, they released Derek and Tyler into temporary custody arrangements while formal charges were processed. Bridget was issued court orders and escorted away. As the patrol cars finally drove off, the street returned to silence. I stood alone on the porch, wrapped in my robe, staring at broken glass in the backyard and tire marks on the asphalt. The war for my father's legacy was over, but the aftermath had only just begun. 2 months later, the consequences unfolded exactly as you'd expect when greed finally meets reality. Bridget was forced to liquidate everything. Her luxury home, her designer furniture, her cars. Every asset went toward repaying the money she had stolen. The real estate board launched an investigation after Vance submitted the police reports. Her license was revoked permanently. The career she had used to belittle me for years vanished overnight. Derek filed for divorce less than 3 weeks after the arrest. He couldn't forgive her for dragging him into a felony charge that nearly destroyed his life. Tyler avoided prison, but the judge wasn't lenient. 3 years of strict probation. 500 hours of community service. No leaving the county without permission. His college plans were postponed indefinitely. Their once polished family image dissolved into court documents and whispered gossip. Meanwhile, I sold the villa. Walking through those empty halls felt too heavy, too full of echoes and memories. I found a quiet, elderly couple who promised to plant roses in the garden and fill the house with laughter again. With the proceeds, I bought a small cottage near my school. It wasn't grand, but it was warm. It had sunlight in every room, and it finally felt like mine. I used part of the inheritance to establish a scholarship fund in my father's name for students who couldn't afford college. He had believed deeply in education and second chances. It felt right to let his legacy live on that way. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I sat on my porch swing grading essays while sipping tea. The breeze carried the sound of distant traffic and children playing somewhere down the block. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message was short, desperate, asking for help. I recognized the tone immediately. Bridget. Even now, she still believed I owed her something. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I blocked the number. No anger, no hesitation, just closure. I set the phone down and picked up my red pen, marking a student's paper with a smile. Because somewhere along this painful journey, I had learned something important. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up when everything falls apart. Bridget thought power came from money. She thought intimidation could replace preparation. She thought I was weak because I was quiet. But quiet people observe. Quiet people plan. Quiet people endure. I didn't destroy my sister. She did that herself. All I did was stop protecting her from the consequences. And in doing so, I finally protected myself. 2 months after that night, the night flashing, police lights turned my quiet street into a crime scene. The world finally felt calm again. Not magically better. Not perfect. Just quieter. The sky over Plano seemed bluer somehow. The mornings felt lighter. And for the first time since my father had gotten sick, I could breathe without feeling like something heavy was sitting on my chest. I had moved into my new cottage by then. It wasn't large or impressive. No sweeping staircase. No chandelier. Just soft sunlight through the kitchen window, creaky wooden floors, and a small garden out back that caught the afternoon breeze. It was enough. Every morning before school, I watered the plants and listened to birds instead of sirens or hospital monitors. Every evening, I cooked simple meals and graded essays at a little desk by the window. My students complained about homework. My colleagues asked how I was settling in. Life returned in small, ordinary pieces. Sometimes, though, memories still surfaced when I least expected them. I would reach for a coffee mug and suddenly remember standing beside my father's bed, holding his trembling hand while he tried to apologize for being sick. Or I'd hear a car door slam outside and feel my stomach tighten, recalling the sound of Bridget's SUV peeling away from the villa that afternoon. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, in moments you barely notice. Bridget didn't disappear completely after signing the agreement. She tried, but consequences have a way of following people who spend their lives running from them. She moved into a small rental on the edge of town after selling everything she owned to repay the money she stole. Her once polished image as a successful real estate agent was gone. The industry she had built her identity around closed its doors to her permanently. Derek started over in a one-bedroom apartment near his job, rebuilding from scratch. He rarely spoke to Bridget after the divorce. Whatever love they had shared couldn't survive handcuffs and court dates. Tyler struggled the most. 3 years of probation meant weekly check-ins, drug testing, and community service assignments that left him exhausted and resentful. He picked up trash along highways under the hot Texas sun. He cleaned graffiti off brick walls. For the first time in his life, he learned that actions come with consequences. I didn't follow their lives closely. I didn't need to, because my story wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about learning how to live again. I sold the villa not long after everything settled. Walking through those empty rooms felt like walking through a museum of grief. Every echo reminded me of my father's laughter, of holiday dinners, of afternoons spent in the garden. I wanted the house to belong to someone who could fill it with new memories, not someone who associated it with loss. The elderly couple who bought it promised to plant roses along the fence and host Sunday dinners for their grandchildren. I liked that. With part of the proceeds, I established the Arthur Memorial Scholarship Fund at my school. My father believed deeply in education, especially for kids who didn't start life with advantages. Every year, one student now receives help with tuition in his name. It feels like he's still teaching, in his own way. Some afternoons after grading papers, that's how I know I made the right choice. One quiet Sunday, I sat on my porch swing with a cup of tea, red pen in hand, marking essays about the civil rights movement. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. My phone buzzed beside me. Unknown number. The message was short. "Meredith, I really need help, please." I didn't need to ask who it was. Even in desperation, Bridget's words carried the same expectation that someone else would fix what she broke. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I pressed block. Not out of anger, not out of spite, out of self-respect. Protecting your peace doesn't mean you hate someone. It means you finally love yourself enough to stop letting them hurt you. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty. If I regret how everything turned out, I don't, because I didn't create this situation. I responded to it. I didn't manipulate documents. I didn't try to steal from a dying man. I didn't break into someone's home in the middle of the night. I simply refused to be silent. I refused to be intimidated. I chose preparation over panic. My sister believed power came from money. She believed loud voices win arguments. She believed being the eldest entitled her to everything. She underestimated something far stronger: patience, planning, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing the truth. I didn't defeat Bridget. Her greed did. All I did was stop shielding her from the consequences. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by who shows up when you're at your weakest. It's defined by who holds your hand in hospital rooms, by who stays when life becomes inconvenient, and by who respects your boundaries, even when they don't benefit from them. Revenge doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like security cameras. Sometimes it looks like walking away. And sometimes it looks like sitting on a quiet porch swing, sipping tea, knowing you finally chose peace. I used to think strength meant enduring everything silently. Now I know it means standing up for yourself, even when the person hurting you shares your last name. My sister laughed at me that day in the parking lot. She thought I was just a teacher. She thought I was powerless. But quiet people observe, quiet people prepare, quiet people survive, and sometimes quiet people win, not with shouting, not with violence, but with truth, patience, and the courage to protect what matters most. My father's legacy wasn't a house. It wasn't furniture. It wasn't money. It was integrity, and I intend to honor it for the rest of my life. Sometimes people think revenge has to be loud. They imagine shouting, broken relationships, and dramatic confrontations. But this story shows something different. It shows that the most powerful kind of justice is quiet. It's preparation, it's patience, and it's having the courage to protect yourself when the people hurting you are the ones who share your blood. This wasn't just a story about inheritance or money. It was about boundaries. It was about choosing dignity over fear and truth over manipulation. Meredith didn't win because she was ruthless. She won because she stayed calm, planned carefully, and refused to let greed define her future. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of your own struggles, or showed you the strength of quiet resilience, then you're in the right place. Here at Revenge Drama House, we share powerful stories about justice, family, and finding peace after betrayal. So, if you enjoy deep emotional storytelling and real-life style revenge stories with meaning, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Thank you for listening, and remember, protecting your peace is the greatest victory of all.